Good afternoon, everybody. Chris DiCenso here. I want to welcome you to the 3 effective management tools that you're not using. At least that's what we think. And I'm just going to jump right in. We've got plenty of people here today. In fact, we have mostly president CEOs. We've got them from manufacturing, retail, high tech, and even consulting. And what we're going to talk about today is this. You know, if you were to build a house, you wouldn't build one without using a hammer, nails, maybe an automated pneumatic gun. So why would you build your business without using some fundamental tools? And that's what we're going to talk about today. In fact, we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to talk about, our goals for today. First, I want to introduce my partner, Paul Plotzik. Paul, you there?
Yes, I am. Hello, folks. Good afternoon.
So we are going to talk to you about some of the management tools, the best practice tools that we have researched and applied, and help you understand that it's so much easier to improve your profitability, improve your growth, to build a higher performing company if you're using some tools. In fact, as we get into it, you'll hear that most of the higher performing, these are companies in the top 25% are applying more tools, and therefore they're more successful. So the agenda is going to be talk about first, why tools. We're going to talk about 3 specific tools that we've been using, been very, very successful, and give you some examples of those tools, and then explain to you how to get started. But first, who are you going to listen to today? Chris DiCenso, one on the left. You can see my bio and experience. I think the points that I'd like you to take away today is that genetically I'm an engineer. I've got a degree in engineering, but genetically I'm an engineer. And what that means is engineers like tools. And in my early career, a lot of engineering, manufacturing, operational tools, product development tools, because it makes it so much easier and to get things done. Now, as I've got a little older, a little more in the senior management side, I've been looking at tools for management. What are the most effective management tools? And probably for the last 20-something years, I've been trying to figure out, some fundamentals for growth, best tools, and I think I've been very happy with what we found. Basically find the best ones and steal them and bring them to our clients. So that's a little about me. Paul, how about you?
Well, thank you. You'll see from my description of my experience, I've worked with a lot of large companies, and including NASA, including the Department of Defense. And one of the things that I've discovered in terms of tools is that as companies get larger, the level of complexity of that organization increases substantially. And one of the things that I discovered, the larger companies that were the most successful organizations, Harley-Davidson's been pretty successful over the years, Crate and Barrel, to name a few, they're the ones that use the tools principally to kind of unpack the level of complexity, because as the organization has grown, the skill set of a lot of the people in the organization sometimes doesn't keep pace with the growth of the organization. But the level of complexity and the growth of the organization doesn't matter. It continues to grow, continues to become more difficult to figure out, more difficult to make decisions, and there are more things happening. That's called complexity. So the organizations, to mirror what you're saying, Chris, the organizations that I found, the larger organizations that are the most successful are the ones that are using tools to unpack complexity. Now, our client base these days, Chris, is a little bit smaller. I think the largest company we're working with is about 1,000 people, if I'm
something like that. Yeah.
And so some of these folks may not be thinking about how the organization has grown, but if they were to stand and look back at where they've been for the past 3 or 4 years, they'll see that exponentially they've grown pretty substantially. And so the use of tools becomes a much more high valued issue for them to use to unpack and make better decisions, unpack the issues and make better decisions.
So I want to hear, and you'll explain us later, unpacking and how do you unpack tools. That's what I want to hear, right? How do you unpack tools? That's okay.
Okay.
Let's talk about it.
You reach into your toolbox. That's what you do. You reach in the toolbox.
You unpack your tools. Okay. growth strategy partners. So management consulting firm, we're research based, and that research you kind of see on the left here, that core has driven. And the point was, how do you drive growth? How do you drive profitable, successful growth? And back to the engineering of me is, well, let's figure that out. Let's ask the very successful CEOs and presidents, which we did. We got over 600 CEOs and presidents that we've surveyed, in addition to third-party research, and identifies what we call these 7 keys to growth, and I call them 7 fundamentals. The point here is that companies, and what we've learned is that companies that are applying these keys, these fundamentals, and some of the tools we're going to show you today, they are more successful. They are growing faster, and they're growing more efficiently.
And these are essentially best practices, Chris. I mean, when you really think about it, I mean, these are the 7 best practices that an organization needs to have in order for it to sustain itself and to grow.
Oh, exactly. And the sad part, not to get too far into it, but when we did the research, we came up with these 7. We call them 7 keys. Like, you look at them, and it's pretty, motherhood and apple pie, pretty basic stuff. But when we start working with our clients or prospects, many of them aren't applying them.
Right.
So, and what you'll see at the bottom there, these 2 numbers, what we've been doing recently is trying to quantify the benefits that our clients have received. And the 7.4, that's return on professional fees. So on average, our clients have gotten 7.4 times what they've paid us in consulting fees in improved operating profits. This is back to the engineer and the math in me. And on average, they've had about a 220% operating profit improvement. So that's just
Nice.
some of the results that we've delivered. So let's talk about tools. Let's start into, like, why tools, right? We've talked a little bit about tools being a way to get more efficient or get things done more efficiently, right? So again, you're gonna dig a hole with a shovel, or you can use, I don't even know what they call that thing on the right-hand side, but it's pretty big and it digs big type holes. In the old days, you might have used a stopwatch. Now you got this performance charting. Tools makes your business more efficient, and many of us are using them today, right? You've got forklifts or pallet jacks and other types of tools you're using in your business. But what we're going to talk about today is management tools. How do you make management decisions, and how do you become more effective, and almost build frameworks? And so tools is a way to help you get things done more efficiently and or implement change more efficiently.
And to go to your picture there about that large machine, and to kind of expand on that metaphor, one of the things that I found with tools is that it helps our clients put themselves essentially in the driver's seat. I mean, one of the things that happens to companies is, sometimes you feel like the company's managing you. What tools do is help you identify what the critical issues are and what the priorities are and what you should be working on, and gives you a structure to which you can frame your thinking and your actions. And it also, what we found is it mitigates frustration. The use of tools, it helps to reduce stress because it gives you a structure and almost a formula in some cases, although we don't live in a linear world, which is a subject for another conversation. It's a level of complexity, and when you think about organizations as systems, that's surely happening. And the use of tools helps to reduce some of that frustration. And also, by the way, one of the things that we've discovered over the past couple of months, I think, Chris, is that we're seeing clients that are using tools to identify risk. And where there's people talk about, well, I want to be very innovative. We'll talk about that soon. It's important to think about what's the risk that we might be entering into with our use of with the movement of our organization or whatever direction we're going in. So use of tools. It really, what I'm saying, to kind of cap this run here is it puts you in the driver's seat, and I think that's an important consideration, and builds confidence also.
Well, it should make life easier, right? I mean, we're talking about management tools, but there's obviously personal tools and time management tools and budgeting tools and home stuff. Yep. And we use them all day. Now I think they call them apps, right? That's the new thing, apps. But they should help. They should, and they do, if applied correctly, help your business become more efficient, more effective, and get things done.
And also reduce some surprises. I mean, that's the other thing. If you can lay out a path forward and track that path, then you mitigate on some of the surprises because you have a better idea of what direction to move in and what are some of the kinds of things that might happen.
Bingo. So let's talk about tools, okay? So back to our research and stealing good things out there. Bain & Company is a very large consulting firm. They've been doing what they call their survey of management tools and trends for at least the last 5 or 6 years. And so they go out and they talk to the Fortune 500. These are the or Fortune 2000, if you will, but the real public companies, very large, very sophisticated, and ask them, what tools are you using and which tools are very effective? And what you'll see here is kind of the summary chart. Up at the y-axis going up is the usage. So what percentage of them are being used, and across the bottom on the right, I think it's the x-axis, is how satisfied are they with the tools. And so ours in the top right-hand corner is high usage and high satisfaction. And you'll see strategic planning, CRM, customer relationship management, balanced scorecard, customer segmentation. You'll see a lot of tools there that are very successful. Big data and analytics, right? And that's something new here. Definitely more large company oriented. But this gives you, there's re-engineering on here. We actually built some re-engineering practices in the years, a lot on here. And so, Paul, what was we're talking earlier, there's 25, 30 tools. How many tools was Bain looking
25
at?
25 tools. Yeah, they look at 25 tools, Chris, and what they do is to rank those 25 tools according to usage. And the other thing the other takeaway that I got from reviewing this study, Chris, was that a lot of organizations think about the kinds of things we're talking about in terms of planning, using tools in a planning process, as being an annual event. And one of the things I walked away with from that study is that it's not just an annual event with many companies now, especially the ones that are more successful. And the quote that I got was, "Don't let the rotation of the earth or the cycles of the sun guide your planning." And what I think about is how many of the larger organizations, especially I worked with, they said, well, it's the last quarter, it's time for us to plan for next year. Is that the only time you do your planning? Right. What happens when, you bump into the tree along the way and it's February or March? Do you wait till the end of the year to assess the damage?
There you go. So what we're going to do today, this is kind of a framework. The 3 tools that we're going to share with you fit as a component of strategic planning. Balanced scorecard. Balanced scorecard is actually a tool for strategic planning. We're going to share with you some tools that fit in these 2, what I call more macro tools, and in the employee survey component. So just to give you a frame of reference, these are now tools that we've been using over the years that obviously fit within the Bain quadrant mix, if you will. But we've had some incredibly impactful results, and the clients have had results based on applying these tools. But first, we're going to have a message from our sponsors, and actually, we're going to have to take a poll. What I'd like to know, I'm going to launch a little survey here, so we'd look to get results from you. What I'm asking, or what we'd like to know is, how often do you formally apply management tools in your business? And you should be able to see everything from all the time to never. And just like to ask you, just click on one of them. You can't click on 2, you got to click on 1. So be curious to know how often you do. And again, I'll share this back with the attendees so you can get a sense of, what's the audience like, how often do they use tools and apply tools. So
this is a forced choice poll is what it's called.
Yes.
Also, Chris, while we're talking about this, I know we have a chat box, and can people put their questions and comments in the chat box as we go along?
They can do that in the chat, and there's also a questions box. So either of those 2. I think I'd push them towards the questions box.
Got it. Okay.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this, and then I'll take a quick look, and you can see how often people use tools. So let me close it, and I'm going to share it with everybody. You seeing it there, Paul?
Yep. I see 14% all of the time, 14% most of the time, 57% some of the time, 14% not very often, and 0 never. So, folks, you can see this. There are different levels of sophistication in terms of the kinds of tools that are used and the frequency of the using different tools.
And most are in that some of the time,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's hopefully then what we'll do is we'll actually be able to share with you 2 tools today that are going to help you be more efficient, more effective in your business. So first tool is what we call, nope, not what we call, but it's actually designed by Tracy Wermer. They wrote a book called This One of Market Leaders. And this to me is the hammer, the nails, the saw. This is a foundational tool that every company can use and every company should use. It's literally that powerful. We use this before we get into strategy or as a part of strategy. And it works like this. The concept is, it's called This One of Market Leaders. And the concept is you have to be great at one discipline and good at the other 2. You can't be everything to everybody, which we hear often all the time, but you have to be great at one and good at the other 2, and therefore there's 3 options. And the 3 options are this. You can be a product leader. So you continuously introduce new products, your innovation, and your goal is basically bringing in new products, obsoleting the old ones. Got some examples here, Gillette, BMW, Johnson & Johnson. These are companies that would be considered product leaders. They're always introducing new innovative products. Second option is what we would call customer intimacy, not to be confused with customer service. So customer intimacy is this unique and tailored products and services to specific segments. I say this, I define it as you know your customer better than they know themselves, okay? Nordstrom, USAA, Disney, some examples of that. In fact, there's a great example of this that may have heard relative to Disney. And it's actually true. I actually was just talking to a Disney exec. And this gets into what customer intimacy is. So, Paul, I don't know if you've heard this. Have I asked you, what's the number 1 question that's asked at Disney World? Have I asked you that one before?
No, you haven't. No.
So
who really is Mickey? Who really is Mickey? Is he really married to Minnie?
See, that wasn't usually one of the questions, but they ask, and the answer is, where's Mickey? Where's the
Goofy?
Where's Goofy? Where's the bathroom? How do you get out? All those basic questions or whatever it is. But the answer is, what time is the 3 o'clock parade? People are thinking, yes. And the point here is that Disney knows that when you're there with your kids, if you've been there before, Disney World, right? You're walking around, everything's chaotic, the kids are all over the place, spilling ice cream, getting lost, whatever the case may be. And so what might come out of your mouth is what time's the 3 o'clock parade? And what you're asking is what Disney knows, because they're customer intimate, they understand you're asking, does it really start at 3 o'clock? Where does it start? Where does it go? Where's the best place to sit if I have a kid that has to go to the bathroom? And so instead of what do they call it? The cast members at Disney, instead of rolling their eyes with a question like that, which isn't very customer oriented, they give those answers. So that's an example of customer intimacy. Third option is what we call operational excellence. Pricing convenience leader. Okay, you're easy to do business with, may not be the lowest cost provider, but you're very easy to do business with, and it's very efficient and effective to get what you want. Amazon, Harry's, Walmart are 3 examples. In fact, I put Harry's up there, and for those that may not know, Harry's is now razors, which is very different than, it's the same thing that Gillette offers. So you got the same company or same product with 2 different approaches to discipline, one being a product driven and the other one being operational. Harry's is, low cost. So the point here is, when we work with organizations, they need to be able to decide, you need to be able to decide, what are you going to be great at and what are you going to be good at? And you got 3: product leadership, customer intimacy, and operational excellence. And what happens, and why is this tool so important? Because when we work with clients and we sit in the executive team and we explain these 3, and then we say, okay, let's go around the room and let's ask, what do you think we should be, just to get some sense of it? We usually get, an answer like this. Okay, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
And the point is, people don't necessarily agree on how we compete. Now let's think about this. And we'll talk a little later about how important it is, because if you decide you're a product leader, your strategies, you know, everything you do is different if you're operational excellence versus product leaders. So the challenge we run into often is that we get different opinions because they honestly haven't thought through it and or have different beliefs. Mm-hmm. So what we do is again, back to the engineering, is take kind of a mathematical approach to this. And we write down the 3 types of disciplines, and then, you know, go through an exercise of facilitating that team to have them prioritize which one's number 1, 2, and 3. We use a weighting scale. I'm not going to get too technical here, but, you know, how important or weighting is it? How are they scoring today? What do they need to be to win in this area? What's that gap? And what we call the weighted gap. What this does by using this tool is 2 things. A, it helps them identify what they have to be great at and then what they have to be good at. But it also shows, using this extension of the tool, this is actually our own design, not from Tracy Wermer, but it shows how much work needs to be done. In fact, this 70% you'll see in the right-hand corner, when we start talking about the strategic goals that are set in an organization, we would say 70% of them should be operationally oriented, 25% customer oriented, and maybe 5% leadership oriented, because that's where the gaps are. Now, one last piece of this tool is how this drives through your business. So this is why we find this to be so foundational. If you can't decide how you're going to compete, well, that's going to impact the type of people that you hire or don't hire. Or let's put it this way: if you're a product leader, you should be looking to hire people, especially in the product development space, that are innovative, very creative, maybe project management driven. And what processes in your business you need to be great at? Well, product leadership driven, product development related processes. And what tools would you want to invest in? Again, concurrent engineering, design for manufacturing and assembly, product development, computer. There's all these technology tools. But that's different if you're a product leader versus being customer intimate. Customer intimate might have different types of people, definitely different processes and different technology and tools. Same thing on the operational side. So this is why we find this to be so fundamental. And what happens usually is when we ask the question, what's great at and what are you good at? We get different answers. And then you start peeling back the organization, you see that they're all over the place in terms of the processes and the technology, and there's no prioritization. So the companies that have been applying this, in the examples that we've done, in fact, kind of the earlier page was kind of an example which is every client we go into, there's a disagreement on what's priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3. And once that gets aligned, then there's a credible focus now on what people, what processes, what technology, what do they need to do to be efficient and effective. And there's a step function improvement in profitability, probably in at least 6 months, if not a year later. Because
and where
now there's focus.
And about focus, that's a good point. Where I found this to be useful is, you mentioned the companies that we've worked with in the past, where we say, what's your discipline? What is it? How do you drive value to customers? And they talk about a variety of different things. They may talk about the product. They may talk about their delivery process. They may talk about how much they love the customer. What I found what's useful about this, Chris, is we can actually walk people through, maybe kind of starting at the end, saying, okay, so what kinds of tools and technology do you folks use in your business? So if we start at the end and work backwards, and ask them, what are the key processes that you think are most important to your business? And then what are the kinds of people? So as opposed to asking them, sometimes some people, it's a loaded question. Gee, are you more concerned about product, customer intimacy, or operational excellence? A lot of organizations answer that question and say, yes, we're concerned about all 3.
They say yes, right, exactly.
Right. But what we know is that if you try to be great at all 3, it won't happen. You can be good at all 3, and you need to be great at 1. So starting maybe from the right side and working backwards helps people answer the question from a data-driven perspective of what they're really good at. Because what we're trying to get at is, what really matters is figuring out how to provide value to your customer better than your rivals, and how to do it now and into the future. That's the key question to this whole thing, this whole conversation.
Well, we're talking about outperforming your competition, right? I mean,
right.
You know, and this is again levels of expertise and levels of performance. There may be companies in a B, B plus, but if you do better than them, you've got to be A minus or A performing.
Right.
This is one of the tools.
Let's talk about the people.
Let's talk about the people. Let's talk about. Come on, fingers, move. Let's talk about the people. And for some reason, there we go. Okay. Let's talk about people, Paul. This is yours.
So, you know, here's a key question. What are you looking for in your leaders? I mean, that's where we're going to start, as opposed to just, you know, everybody in the organization. We'll start with your leadership. And what we think is that there are two clusters, as we call them, or two buckets of characteristics and things that you look for. One is competence. Competence, as we define it here, is, just as we say, it's the combination of the skills, knowledge, and the behaviors required. Represents the ability, as we say here, of an individual to perform a job properly. This is the what of a job. And there's a distinction between the competence and commitment. And as we define commitment here, we're saying, you know, we see this as teamwork, interest to learn, you know, fostering engagement and collaboration. This is about how dedicated are they. And so this is the how of getting work accomplished. And one of the things that we know about commitment is that sometimes it's hard to figure out, and we'll talk a little bit about that, you know, next, is how do you determine competence and commitment. And just understand, we're only looking for leaders. And we're going to share with you a tool that you can use now and identify these two clusters, and that you can also use in your recruiting process. So here's a 4-box model. We really love 4-box models. One, because they're easy to understand, and we have software that helps us draw it. So if you look in the lower left-hand side, here we're looking at, in that quadrant, a low level of commitment and low competence. And as we move, you know, through this 4-box model, the next quadrant, you know, we move up the scale of commitment. So here we're talking about high commitment with low competence. And what's interesting is that we may have people who fit into this quadrant. They're very, very excited about what the organization's about. They may be very passionate, but they're really having a tough time on the competence side. And then the other quadrant here is that we have somebody who has great competence and very low commitment. In fact, you know, we were working with a client recently where we found a number of people who were really, really good at their job on the technical side. But typically what we found, by the way, is that there's a lot of high competence in the IT world, but they're assessed at low commitment. It's not that they're not committed to an organization. Frequently they you know, we find a lot of people that are in IT really like to work alone and don't necessarily like to connect with other people. That's not a bad thing. That's just a kind of condition of the situation. And we'll talk about how to help move that along. And of course, the right-hand quadrant is a high-performing organization. This is where you have people who are very well committed to the organization and have a high level of competence. And these high-performing organizations, understand, we've seen them, and you've seen them. You know that they have 4 distinct characteristics that I'll just talk briefly about. One is that the folks who are here and the organizations who are in this quadrant, everyone is very goal directed. They really understand what's required of them. Teams are aligned. There's a set of clear roles. There's a level of high commitment. And by the way, one of the things that happens when people in an organization have high commitment to the organization, a spin-off to that is trust. Trust becomes very much understood and respected in the organization, and typically we find organizations that are in this quadrant not only have high commitment and high competence, but have a high level of trust as well. People in this quadrant are very action-oriented, and also we found that there's a lot of flexibility and agility. We're in a dynamic economy these days. Markets are very, very dynamic, so that's very, very important. So this is a quadrant that you really want to move your people to and move your organization to. And we'll talk about that next.
And I wanted to add, you know, people people may not remember, but of the 7 keys to growth, 7 fundamentals, one of them was the right people in the right seats, right? So this is kind of a supporting tool that's used to help you with people, but getting the right people in the right seats.
Right.
I just wanted to add that in there.
And by the way, what's important to make the distinction there, Chris, is we've worked with organizations that identify the people first and the seat second. They say, well, you know, Paul would be good in this seat. Well, what we need to do first is think through the competence that's required. It goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of the discipline. What's the discipline of your organization? What is that you are going to excel in? And that then determines the kind of competency you need, and it helps you select the people.
Right on.
So
right on.
Here's what we mean. Here's a little bit of an example of what we're talking about. So if you look at person number 1 here up in the top left-hand side, this is an individual that has really high commitment, and their level of competence is not so high, but their commitment is there. So we know that this is a person who is excited about the organization, excited about the mission, excited about the work and what they think they can accomplish, and what they hope the organization will accomplish. What we need to do then is to move them along the competence scale. So this is a person who needs, well, you've all guessed it, probably needs some development. So we need to identify specifically what are the competencies that we want this person to increase, and we need to put together a development program for that individual. If you look at person number 2, this person, you know, the competence is up there, the commitment's up there. That's a person that is probably the backbone of many of our organizations. So what we would like to do is to move them further up on the competence level, on the competence scheme and the commitment scale. And by the way, what we found is that typically a person that is here represented by this dot labeled number 2, because their commitment is high and their competence is at a good level, their commitment will increase typically the more you engage them in developmental exercises, because the message you're delivering to them is that you're important to us. And most people respond to that kind of message and get more committed to the organization. Look down the right-hand corner, number 3. This is typically the person I spoke about before, high level of competence, really good at what they do. And as I said, we found that this typically is, we found people who like to work alone, and that's not a bad thing. But what we need to do is to help them see how working together with other people will increase their performance and their productivity. And frequently for people that are high in the competence level, that's relatively easy to do, and I'm sure some of you have discovered that. Now, person number 4 presents a little bit of a problem in some ways for some of us. This is a person whose commitment is low and competence is low. And what we've done is to essentially say, this is an up or out kind of a conversation with this individual. We can put together a development plan, which we've done with a number of people over the years, and see how this person progresses. And if this person is not moving along that path towards the upper right-hand quadrant, then this person is not, they're misplaced in our organization. And it's not a bad thing that they go elsewhere or they have to go elsewhere. It could be just a bad fit. Your organization's not right for them, they're not right for you. And this is your turn. This is one, we're going to send this to you after the this webinar. And so this is a page that you can print off for yourself. What we suggest are a couple of things. This is something you can use, as I'm indicating. What you might want to do with the people that report to you is to give this to them, give them a copy of this, and ask them to rate themselves. And then you do the same. And what we found is that it's a terrific lever for a great conversation about how you see the individual and how they see themselves. So what we're suggesting is you can do this with, just think it through on your own, by the way, initially with current employees, past employees, direct reports, colleagues. Think of as many people as you can to practice. This is not a scientific study, by the way. This is really the impressions that you have, and then as you share with other people, the impressions that they have. And as you move through the conversation, you can talk about specific behaviors that you have identified as the person being competent, their level of competence, and their level of commitment. You can talk about specific behaviors. The individual can do that as well. So we're suggesting at one point you practice this on your own, and then think about who are the people you'd want to give them a copy, have them complete it on themselves, on their person, and then you do it for them, about them, and then the two of you get together and have a conversation. It's a great conversation starter.
And this is something, Paul, they can do. I mean, themselves, right? Most of the present CEOs listening, they can just, think of their team and start putting names in the quadrants, right? Based on some quick,
Right.
Subjective analysis on, commitment, and competence.
And competence, right?
And
Yeah, we can get more scientific about this, but this is a good first step. You may need to get, pick up some psychological testing, et cetera, to really make some distinctions around the issues of competence and commitment. But this is a good first step.
All right. Third tool is going to be what we call, actually we don't call it, they call it Ansop's matrix. Actually, we call it the growth matrix. And the reason why we find this as a great tool and as an important tool, I'm sure most of you listening today probably have a budget or have some goals on how, and revenue growth in particular, so we're talking about revenue growth, where's that revenue growth going to come from? And it's going to be 5%, 6% of the 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, pick a number. That's usually defined. Then the next question, though, my question is, where's it coming from? And if you look at, from a revenue growth perspective, there's actually 6 ways to generate new revenues. One of them is to raise your prices, which isn't on here because it's really not very efficient, very effective, and stable over time. And that leaves you with the other 4. And so if you're going to grow your business, you can grow by taking your existing products. So on the left side here, you've got existing products and new products. You can basically sell your existing products and services to your existing customers. It's called market penetration. All right, so sell more to existing is one way to grow revenues. Another way is to get new customers or enter new markets with the same products and services that you have. Now,
and that's an important distinction. That's not changing your products or services, Chris. That's what you're talking about.
Just taking the same stuff and finding new customers for it, right?
Yep. Going to different geographic area, finding different industries that you can penetrate, et cetera.
The third option is to take the existing customers that you have and then sell new products to them, which is what they call product development. And then fourth is diversification, new products, new markets, new services. We throw the mergers and acquisitions component maybe into that quadrant 4. So this is, wow, Chris, that's amazing. Never thought of it that way. Of course you have. But now my question is this: where's the growth coming from? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so when we look at this, what we're looking for and what's been very, very helpful, why is this tool helpful? It's helped the leadership team define in more detail where that revenue growth is going to come from, and then be able to communicate it almost like in an elevator pitch mm-hmm. to the rest of the employees. And so it looks something like this, right? We had as an example actually that we're going to share with you, where we had one client that it did painting, carpentry, and roofing for condo associations. And they had an aggressive growth goal, and they weren't achieving that growth goal. It was hard for them to grow. And so when we sat with them, and they identified a $4 million growth goal over the next year, and when we asked them just generally, where's it coming from? Well, they went towards what they call their roofing product line. And the reason was, so roofing products, their average sale for a roofing project was $100,000. The average sale for a painting project was $25,000, and they were getting into carpentry, which is about a $50,000 project, so just averages. And I said, well, why roofing? And they said, well, I can sell one of those to 4 painting jobs. And so initially, their focus was 75% of their growth was going to be coming through going after new customers using their existing services, of which roofing was one of them. And only 20% was going to be focused on the painting, and there's a little bit down here in this new thing called carpentry. But this was how they had planned to grow their business. Then we said, well, let's peel this back a little. Let's look a little more and understand your success rate, specifically with the painting and roofing customers. And what we found out was that when we looked at their painting bids, quotes, if you will, they were winning 47% of their painting bids of $25,000. And that was kind of funny that which actually is a very good win ratio. In fact, the president owner was pissed when he heard that, and I was like, "Wait, you're mad?" He goes, "Well, obviously our pricing is too low." But when we looked at the painting, they won at a high success rate, and they had a high conversion going from painting to roofing clients. If you're going to go get a new customer, what's the likelihood of a customer spending $100,000 with you or 25? Well, obviously it's 25. So as we looked at their sales approach, their customer history, we also looked like they had a lot of existing customers that weren't using all their painting services. We actually modified their this chart changed, and 80% of their focus and growth became trying to sell painting projects, and 20% were focused on roofing. And what this did, because again, let's talk about some basic stuff. I'm asking, their salespeople, if you make 10 calls, in a day or a week, how many to new customers and how many to existing? And the ratio before this was 8 to new and 2 or so to existing. And now we changed that. We literally swapped it. So 80% of their sales efforts became focused on going after existing customers and trying to sell them painting projects. And what this did was it helped them achieve that revenue growth goal that they were not achieving because they didn't have the focus and they didn't have the understanding of effectively where sales going, who are they going after, and what they're trying to sell. Now, the thing that ended was kind of interesting because at the end of the year, beginning of the following year, when we reviewed this, it was actually 75-25. They had some big wins on the roofing side, but again, much different focus than going after roofing projects for 100,000 versus painting for 25,000. So Ansoff's matrix is something that, as you start thinking about not only how you compete and now what the revenue growth goal is, well, how is that going to happen? And now when you start the communication and you can walk down the halls or, put on charts, we're going to grow by $4 million, 80% of that's going to be coming by selling or painting projects or whatever it is, these products to our existing customers. That's very clear. People know what to do. And by the way, they understand the impact on that. Okay. Versus if there was going to be roofing, and again, just being a service or a product, if the head of roofing goes, man, if we're going to grow by roofing, I need to get more people. So it cascades all the way down. So Ansoff's matrix is the third tool here. You say
two things that I got from this as we were putting this webinar together that I thought were important. One is it proves the dictum that you can get a lot of business from current customers that you haven't necessarily thought about. And it's much easier to sell a current customer than it is a new customer. Your current customer knows you and you know them. You have a pretty good idea of what their business is and what their expectations are. And the other is this helps people see that the focus needs to be on revenue increase versus making decisions based on costs, something called cost-based thinking. Costs are very comfortable, I found, with a lot of companies to talk about, but the costs are not determined by the customer. The customer determines the revenue. Customers are in charge there. The cost, the company makes the decision. So when you start to make decisions about bringing revenue in, that's a whole different ballgame than thinking about starting out with what all this is going to cost.
Exactly. So
you made a good distinction. I liked it.
So we've gone through why tools. We've given you what we think are the top 3 tools, not just because they're successful, but they're actually applicable to what you as presidents, CEOs, and leaders should be thinking about, which is strategy and people. These are 2 basically strategy tools and people tools. We've given you a few examples. Now let's talk about how to get started. That's great, Chris. Great tools. Now what? Well, let's make it easy. You've got 3 choices. Where do you start? So Paul and I had a little debate on this. And here's the summary, and then I'll let Paul add to this. So you kind of need to start with your primary discipline because that drives everything. If you can't decide how you're going to compete with your primary method of competition, primary discipline, because again, that impacts your people, that impacts the products, the services, technology, the processes. But we also said, and I think, Paul, your point was, but you can assess your people someone listening today can spend an hour, or less with that quadrant chart and assess their people and get a quick assessment as to, where they fit. And really what we're looking for is an, oh shoot, I got somebody that really isn't there, and this chart just helped me figure that out. You kind of know it. And the reason why we might suggest you start with that is if you do have some people changes, that's going to be a longer time. It's going to take longer to get done, right? Than the primary discipline, which is going to have to get team together and get that facilitated. And then the growth quadrants that we think we'd agree would be third. So the suggestion is to do a quick assessment of your people, of your direct leadership team. So again, I'm talking about your direct reports, but then quickly get into the primary discipline. This primary discipline, by the way, this is all public information. You can go search Tracy Wimmers and find his book. They got a couple, an article or two. The spreadsheet tool that you saw is ours, something that we've created. It took decades and decades to create. Well, no, not really. It's not that hard.
Right.
But the suggestion here is to start with your people quickly and then go to the discipline. Paul, did you want to add to that?
Well, the point I'd like to add is that in the chart that we had where we talked about, you can start on the left side or start on the right side. This is the chart's very useful because you can identify the activities, the tasks and activities and tools being used, the kinds of things that are happening in your organization, and work through who the kinds of people you have in your primary discipline. And it's a little bit like project planning. For me, when we do projects, we start with essentially step 1 and then go to step 10, a completed project. Then we turn around and go back the other way. And that's what I'm suggesting here, that you think through, whether you think through your primary discipline first and move to people in growth quadrants, that's fine. Or start with, thinking about what you're focused on, the kinds of people that you have that are helping you be focused on that and their productivity level, their competence, and what does that mean for you about what your primary discipline is. And you'll get it. You'll be able to figure it out.
We have some questions I see here, but if there's others you want to ask, please put them into the questions box. We'll try to get them before we're done, because we just got basically one more poll and a wrap up here to do. And what I want to do now is launch another poll, because the question that we have for you is, what's going to be your top challenge, in applying these tools or others in your business, or in generally, not just these tools, but in general. Do you have a trouble with buy-in from your team that you want to use them? Maybe understanding how the tools should be applied. There's obviously the outcome of the tool. It may be one thing to use the tool, but how do you implement the outcomes of the tool? That's the third one down. Maybe I don't see any value in these tools or other tools, or these tools in particular aren't the ones that fit what we're dealing with today. So would you, I see us, we'll go to over half, 70% completed, and I'm going to share that with everybody, and then we'll wrap this up. So if you have any questions, again, put that in there. Okay. Wow, that was a quick, almost everybody's voted, but I'm going to just wrap this up. We got 48, so we're getting close to time. So let me do this, Paul. I'm going to close it, and I'm going to share it with you, and I'm going to tell me what you see when you see the results here.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I'm not surprised. 80% are on implementing the outcomes of the tools. I'm really not surprised. Again, going back to my experience with large corporations, that was exactly their problem. So it almost doesn't matter the size of your organization. It's taking the data, taking the outcomes that you've determined, the results you've determined from using the tools, and saying, okay, what do we do with these? How do we make these work to improve our organization? Because that's what this is all about. How do we deliver value to our customers?
That's the change piece. That's exactly it. It's how do you implement change, right?
Right.
I've got a couple questions here. We'll do a couple before we wrap up. One is, what if the team doesn't agree on how to prioritize your discipline? Oh, so what if the team doesn't agree? Well, they're not going to agree, because we always find that. By the way, did I hide the poll? Is it back to
the poll is showing? Oh,
okay. I'll go back to the main page here. this is the challenge if the team doesn't agree. And what the reason why they typically don't agree is you really don't have a good definition of what each of the 3 disciplines mean to you. And so I bring out another tool called the 5 whys, and we start asking people, why do you think that we're product leaders? Why do you think we're customer intimate? And you start peeling that back. Customer intimacy is the one that most people have a difficulty. In fact, they all want to say we're customer intimate because they think we need to be. But when they don't agree, it's usually because there's a poor understanding of how each discipline applies to your company. Again, first what we do is make sure it's clear of what is each discipline and how you are demonstrating or showing it. So that's, again, another tool, but again, it's a facilitated discussion that gets them to understand, and then we get some great focus.
And it goes back to something that I mentioned before, and using that the PowerPoint slide that shows the links of the discipline, the people, the processes, etc. And it's good to remind people that if you try to be good at all 3, you won't be great at any one. The goal here is to be great at one and good at the other 2.
Exactly.
So helping people make that distinction is sometimes useful. It doesn't mean that you're saying we are not going to be customer intimate. We're only going to be concerned about products. That's not what you're saying. You're saying we will continue to be customer intimate. One of the examples, by the way, that we use is Gillette. And I'm familiar with Gillette. I worked there off and on as a consultant some years ago. And if you go to a store, in J&J, pretty much the same, you go to a store and you look at all the products from both of those companies that are on the shelves, and you think, wait a minute, I thought this was a company that was more concerned about products versus operational efficiency. They have an outrageously great, both companies have an outrageously good logistics process. They can move product onto shelves very, very rapidly in large quantities. That doesn't mean they've forgotten about how to get their excellent product from manufacturing, from product end to the retail operation. Not at all. They're really good at that. They're great at coming up with pretty spectacular products.
They've excelled at the first discipline, and then they moved on to the second one. And that's,
absolutely,
again, the classic sequence. Hey, I got a question for you, Paul. What if the CEO leader doesn't sit in the top right quadrant? So what if it sounds like that quadrant? So what if the CEO leader is not competent and committed? The person was asking the question about the CEO. A CEO or the leader. It has both. So
Chief Operating Officer. Well, what we found is that a couple of things happen. One is when you use this very simple tool, and the person's boss sits with the individual. This is a little bit like there's an awareness process that goes on. People typically haven't done this to think through what's the cluster of things called competence and the cluster of things that represent commitment and how they fare in both of those. What we found is when you show people how you're assessing them and how they're assessing themselves and talk about the gap, that gap, and it depends on whether or not the person wants to fill that gap. And if they don't want to fill the gap, then you've got a different conversation to have. But typically what we found is once people see and understand that gap, they get a renewed interest in closing the gap. Now, the challenge for you, if you're their boss, is to work out for them what the developmental process is for them to move from where they are to where you need them to be. And that's a challenge for some organizations. We just worked on a couple of those a few weeks ago, putting together development programs. When I had that work I was doing with Barty over in Africa, Airtel. Barty bought Airtel, and Airtel is the largest telecommunications company in Africa. And what happened with their purchase of that telecommunications company, they just got a lot of people whose competency and commitment was questionable. And so we did a quick assessment on each of the people I was working with, and then designed a developmental program to move them up the scale, or in the case of a couple of people, help them realize that they would not fit in the new organization.
A little coaching doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah, executive coaching. So helping people. One of the things we were talking about, Chris, by the way, speaking of coaching, is that's what we're talking about here is helping organizations determine where their distinctive competences and their distinctive capabilities, so that they can improve results. And if you look at some of the finest athletes in the world, they have coaches that help them out. They ask for help when they can't figure things out. And to move themselves up to that, essentially that fourth quadrant, to be high performing individuals.
That kind of gets us to our wrap-up key points. There's a few questions we'll try to answer after. We'll send some emails, or if they need to talk to us, give us a ring. The points we wanted to make here, and I was kind of joking, but he or she with the most tools wins. The companies that are applying these tools are more successful, because these, again, tools to help basically drive profitability, because you're becoming more efficient, more effective, then they're more profitable. And then, Paul, you found this, if it is to be, it's up to me.
Right.
So it's up, which meaning to you listening today, it's up to you to decide how and when these tools should be applied to your business. We've given you 3 that, honestly, they're all fundamental. You should be using all of them in some form or fashion to help you build the business and be more effective.
And it's also important to remember that to be a good leader in a bad market versus a follower in a good one is in a better position to be in. In other words, if the market is kind of crappy and you're a leader in that market, you're at the top of your game, and you're going to create a different market. You're going to make that market work for you versus being a follower in a good one. A follower is, your second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth down the line. But to be a leader, you're number one, and the market may not be great, but you're making it great for you. And that's an important distinction.
This is what high-performing companies do, right, Paul? They're applying the right tools at the right place to be more effective, more efficient. We've given you 3 today. If you have questions on how to apply them, you want some expertise, some independent expertise on facilitated sessions and helping you basically take your business to that next level, kind of like Paul mentioned, as the star performing athletes do, give us a ring. We will send out a copy of this presentation. It is being recorded, and so we'll get that link to you in the next day or 2. It might be Monday. But Paul, anything you want to say at the end here?
Yeah, if you have people in your organization that you think might benefit from just listening to this webinar, don't hesitate to send them to our website, as Chris said, where this will be probably Monday, and at their leisure they can listen to it. Also, if you liked this, there are other webinars that we've done, and there are podcasts also that are on our website. It's growthstrategypartners.com.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and happy Thanksgiving. Bye-bye.